German pilots had a name for it: Der Gabelschwanz-Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. It was a name born of fear, respect, and hard-won experience. In the desperate skies over Europe, where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death, this aircraft became a legend. This is the story of the Lockheed P-38 Lightning and how American ingenuity created a fighter that would haunt the Luftwaffe's finest pilots. February 1939, Burbank, California. While Europe stood on the brink of war, Lockheed's chief engineer, Clarence Kelly Johnson, was about to unveil something the world had never seen. The XP-38 prototype rolled out onto the tarmac, and veteran pilots stopped in their tracks. This wasn't just unusual, it was revolutionary. Twin booms, twin engines, twin everything. Where conventional fighters had one engine and one tail, the Lightning had two of each, connected by a central nacelle that housed the pilot and an unprecedented concentration of firepower. It looked like nothing else in the sky, and that distinctive silhouette would soon become unforgettable to both friend and foe. The design wasn't born from artistic vision. It was pure pragmatic genius. The Army Air Corps had demanded the impossible: a fighter that could reach 360 miles per hour at altitude, climb to 20,000 feet in 6 minutes, and maintain that performance for an hour. In 1937, this was science fiction. No single engine could deliver that kind of power. So Kelly Johnson's team made a bold choice. If one engine wasn't enough, they'd use two. But twin engines created a problem. Where do you put the tail? A conventional tail behind twin engines would create turbulence and control issues. Johnson's solution was elegant and radical. Split the tail, mount it on twin booms extending from each engine nacelle. The result was a fighter that looked like it had flown straight out of a comic book. On January 27, 1939, test pilot Ben Kelsey took the XP-38 up for its maiden flight. For 11 minutes, he pushed the revolutionary aircraft through its paces. When he landed, his report was simple and stunning. This thing could fly. More than that, it could fly fast. Really fast. 2 weeks later, Kelsey attempted to set a transcontinental speed record, flying from California to New York. He was making incredible time, averaging over 350 miles per hour, when disaster struck. Approaching Mitchell Field in New York, the engines failed. Kelsey crash-landed on a golf course. He walked away. The prototype didn't. But the Army had seen enough. They ordered 13 more for testing. By the time America entered World War II in December 1941, the P-38 Lightning was entering operational service. But this revolutionary fighter was about to face the most challenging proving ground imaginable: combat against the Luftwaffe, whose pilots had been honing their skills in combat since 1939. November 1942. Operation Torch. American forces invaded North Africa, and the P-38 Lightning flew its first combat missions in the European theater. The Luftwaffe was waiting. The German pilots who first encountered the Lightning were among the most experienced combat aviators in the world. They had flown against the RAF over Britain, against the Soviets on the Eastern Front. They knew every fighter the Allies could throw at them: Spitfires, Hurricanes, Yaks, and now these American newcomers, the P-40 Warhawks, and P-38 Lightnings. The first encounters were brutal lessons for both sides. American pilots, many seeing combat for the first time, faced veterans who had hundreds of combat hours. The Germans quickly learned that this strange twin-boomed fighter was unlike anything they'd faced before. Hauptmann Hans Joachim Marseille, the Star of Africa, encountered P-38's shortly before his death in September 1942. He noted their speed advantage. Major Gunther Rahl, who would survive the war with 275 victories, called the Lightning a formidable opponent in the hands of a skilled pilot. But the Germans also identified weaknesses. The P-38's Allison engines could lose power at extreme altitudes due to turbocharger issues. In the freezing air above 25,000 feet, the cockpit, positioned between the engines rather than over one, could become brutally cold, affecting pilot performance. And those engines, the source of the Lightning's speed, also made it heavier and less maneuverable than single-engine fighters in tight-turning combat. Yet the Lightning had advantages that German pilots learned to fear. 4 50 caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon, all mounted in the nose. No convergence point to worry about. No wing-mounted guns that only aligned at a specific distance. When a Lightning pilot put his crosshairs on you, every bullet and shell followed the same path. The effect was devastating. And that speed. In level flight and in dives, the P-38 could outrun almost anything the Luftwaffe had in 1943. A German pilot who made the mistake of trying to chase a Lightning in a dive often found himself hopelessly outpaced, watching his prey escape while his own aircraft shook and threatened to come apart. The twin engines provided another crucial advantage: redundancy. Luftwaffe pilots were trained to aim for an enemy's engine, knowing a single-engine fighter with a dead power plant was a dead aircraft. But Lightning pilots who lost an engine could often nurse their wounded bird home. The second engine, if it kept running, could bring them back across hundreds of miles of hostile territory. By early 1943, German intelligence had designated the P-38 as a priority target. Luftwaffe pilots were briefed specifically on the Lightning's capabilities and weaknesses. Recognition silhouettes were distributed. The distinctive twin-boom design meant German pilots could identify a Lightning from miles away, giving them time to position for attack or, increasingly, to disengage. It was during this period that the nickname emerged, Der Gabelschwanzteufel, the fork-tailed devil. Some historians debate whether this was an official Luftwaffe designation or propaganda created by Lockheed. But German pilots who fought against the Lightning confirm the name was used, though perhaps not universally. Whether official or not, it captured something real, a recognition that this unusual American fighter demanded respect. August 1943. The combined bomber offensive was in full swing. American B-17's and B-24's pounded German industrial targets by day, while the RAF struck by night. The Luftwaffe fought desperately to stop them, and increasingly, P-38 Lightnings were there to stop the Luftwaffe. The Lightning's range made it ideal for bomber escort. With drop tanks, it could accompany the heavy bombers deep into German territory, far beyond the range of earlier escort fighters like the P-47 Thunderbolt. For bomber crews, The sight of those distinctive twin booms meant salvation. For Luftwaffe interceptor pilots, those same twin booms meant danger. The tables were turning. German fighter pilots, once the hunters, now found themselves fighting for their lives against aggressive American escorts. Major Richard Bong, America's top ace with 40 confirmed victories, flew the P-38 in the Pacific. But in Europe, Lightning pilots were also racking up impressive scores. Major Robin Olds, who would become a legend in Vietnam, flew P-38's and became an ace in the European theater. The Germans adapted their tactics. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, a top Luftwaffe ace, noted that engaging P-38's in head-on passes was suicidal, given their concentrated nose armament. Instead, German pilots tried to exploit the Lightning's one clear weakness, its turning radius. The Bf-109 and Fw-190 could outturn a Lightning in horizontal combat. But American pilots were learning too. Lightning tactics evolved. Use your speed. Fight in the vertical. Never get slow in a turning fight. Boom and zoom. Dive on the enemy. Make one pass. Then use your speed to escape and set up another attack. In the hands of pilots who understood these principles, the P-38 was deadly. The psychological factor became significant. The Lightning's appearance was distinctive to the point of being iconic. German pilots spotted those twin booms and knew exactly what they were facing. There was no mistaking a Lightning for anything else. That recognition bred caution. April 1945. The war in Europe was ending. The Luftwaffe, once the most feared air force in the world, was a shell of its former self. The fork-tailed devil and its pilot brothers had helped write the final chapters of Germany's aerial warfare. Statistics tell part of the story. P-38's in the European theater scored thousands of aerial victories. They flew countless escort missions, protecting bomber crews who otherwise might not have returned home. They struck ground targets throughout occupied Europe. But numbers don't capture the full impact. The P-38 Lightning represented something larger. American industrial might and innovative engineering applied to the problems of modern warfare. It was a radical design that could have been a catastrophic failure, but instead became a war winner. The German pilots who survived the war carried memories of the Lightning. In post-war interviews, many acknowledged it as a formidable opponent. The turning fight weakness was real, but it was far from the whole picture. Speed, firepower, range, durability. The Lightning had advantages that mattered in the desperate mathematics of aerial combat. Was the fork-tailed devil nickname authentic or marketing? Perhaps both. Lockheed certainly used it in advertising, but the name resonated because it captured something true about how the Lightning was perceived by those who faced it. Whether German pilots universally called it that or not, they certainly recognized and respected what it could do. The P-38 Lightning was not perfect. It had genuine flaws. The cockpit heating issues were never fully resolved. The turning radius was always inferior to single-engine fighters. Early models had compressibility problems in high-speed dives that were only partially addressed. And as the P-51 Mustang arrived in numbers, it proved more cost-effective and ultimately more successful in the European theater. But the Lightning's unique capabilities ensured it remained valuable until the war's end. Its versatility meant it excelled in roles where other fighters struggled, and its distinctive appearance meant it was never forgotten. After the war, Kelly Johnson would go on to design the U-2 spy plane and the SR-71 Blackbird at Lockheed's famous Skunk Works. But the P-38 Lightning was his first masterpiece, the aircraft that proved his revolutionary approach to design could produce world-beating results. The P-38 Lightning holds secrets and stories that go beyond its combat record. Some are remarkable feats of engineering. Others are quirks of fate that changed history. On April 18, 1943, 16 P-38 Lightnings launched from Guadalcanal on what would become one of the most significant missions of the Pacific War. Their target, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack. The mission required flying over 400 miles of open ocean, precise timing, and split-second execution. The Lightnings intercepted Yamamoto's transport exactly as planned. The admiral died in the jungle when his plane crashed. The Lightning's range had enabled an assassination mission that would have been impossible with any other fighter in the American arsenal. German intelligence studied this mission intensely, recognizing that no Luftwaffe fighter could match such operational range. But perhaps the Lightning's strangest contribution to history came through an accident. On July 15, 1942, a flight of P-38's and B-17, running low on fuel and bad weather, made emergency landings on a Greenland ice sheet. The crews were rescued, but the aircraft were abandoned. Over the decades, they became buried under hundreds of feet of ice and snow. In 1992, after years of searching and planning, a team located one of the P-38's, now 264 feet below the surface, and incredibly, brought it back up. After a painstaking restoration, that P-38, named Glacier Girl, flies again today. It's the only fighter aircraft ever recovered from beneath an ice sheet and returned to flight. The Luftwaffe pilots who once hunted these aircraft would have found it impossible to believe that one of their fork-tailed devils would be frozen in time for 50 years, then resurrected to fly again in the 21st century. The Lightning also had an unexpected influence on automotive design. After the war, Harley Earl, the legendary designer at General Motors, was inspired by the P-38's distinctive twin-boom configuration and sleek lines. He incorporated tail fin designs inspired by the Lightning into Cadillac models of the late 1940s, launching a styling trend that would define American automobiles for the next 15 years. The fork-tailed devil's influence extended from the skies of war to the highways of peacetime America, a testament to how its radical design captured the imagination far beyond the battlefield. The P-38 Lightning holds secrets and stories that go beyond its combat record. Some are remarkable feats of engineering. Others are quirks of fate that changed history. And some reveal the human drama behind the metal and machinery. On April 18, 1943, 16 P-38 Lightnings launched from Guadalcanal on what would become one of the most significant missions of the Pacific War. Their target, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack. The mission required flying over 400 miles of open ocean at wave-top height to avoid radar detection, precise timing down to the minute, and split-second execution. The Lightnings intercepted Yamamoto's transport exactly as planned, over the jungles of Bougainville. The admiral died when his plane crashed into the jungle. Only the Lightning possessed the range, speed, and reliability to make such a mission possible. No other Allied fighter could have done it. German intelligence studied this mission intensely, recognizing with growing alarm that no Luftwaffe fighter could match such operational range. The fork-tailed devil could reach out and strike targets that should have been safe. But the Lightning's reach came with challenges that pilots had to overcome daily. The cockpit, positioned in the central nacelle between those two powerful engines, created a unique environment. Unlike single-engine fighters, where the pilot sat directly over or behind the engine, benefiting from its heat, Lightning pilots were suspended between their engines with nothing but thin aluminum and plexiglass protecting them from the -50-degree temperatures at altitude. The cockpit heating system was inadequate, a problem that was never fully solved. Pilots wore electrically heated suits, but frostbite was still common on long missions. Some pilots reported that their hands would become so cold they could barely grip the controls. Others described their breath freezing on the inside of the canopy, obscuring their vision at the worst possible moments. One pilot recalled nearly losing consciousness from the cold during a high-altitude escort mission over Germany, saved only when his formation descended to engage enemy fighters and warmer air. The Lightning also had a deadly quirk that killed experienced pilots during training: compressibility. When diving at high speed, the aircraft could encounter shock waves that formed over the wings and tail surfaces. The controls would lock up, and the pilot would be unable to pull out of the dive. Early P-38's would shake violently, then nose over into an increasingly steep dive from which there was no recovery. The solution required dive flaps, specially designed surfaces under the wings that disrupted the airflow and allowed pilots to maintain control at high speeds. But before this fix was implemented, test pilot Ralph Verdon died in 1941 when his XP-38 entered an uncontrollable dive during testing. His sacrifice and the investigation that followed led to modifications that saved countless lives in combat. Luftwaffe pilots, observing Lightning tactics, noticed that American pilots seemed reluctant to pursue them in steep dives during 1942 and early 1943. They didn't know why. Compressibility was a closely guarded secret, but they used this knowledge to escape. Perhaps the Lightning's strangest contribution to history came through an accident that would captivate imaginations 50 years later. On July 15, 1942, a flight of 6 P-38's and 2 B-17 bombers, flying from the United States to Britain via Greenland and Iceland, encountered severe weather over Greenland's ice sheet. Running low on fuel with zero visibility, the formation leader made the difficult decision to land on the ice. All 8 aircraft put down safely. All 25 crew members were rescued over the following days. But the aircraft were abandoned, deemed too difficult and expensive to recover from such a remote location. Over the decades, Greenland's relentless snowfall buried them. Each year, another 10 feet of snow compressed into ice. The Lost Squadron, as they became known, disappeared beneath the frozen surface. In 1992, After years of searching using ground-penetrating radar, a team located one of the P-38's, now entombed 264 feet below the surface under millions of tons of ice. What followed was an engineering feat nearly as impressive as the Lightning's original design. The recovery team melted a shaft down through the ice using hot water, then carefully excavated the aircraft in pieces. The P-38, remarkably well preserved in its frozen tomb, was brought to the surface, transported to the United States, and meticulously restored over nearly a decade. In October 2002, Glacier Girl, as the restored Lightning was christened, flew again. It remains airworthy today, the only fighter aircraft ever recovered from beneath an ice sheet and returned to flight. The Luftwaffe pilots who once hunted these aircraft would have found it impossible to believe that one of their fork-tailed devils would be frozen in time for 50 years, then resurrected to fly again in the 21st century. It's a testament to the Lightning's robust construction that it could survive such an ordeal and fly again. The Lightning also had an unexpected influence that extended far beyond military aviation. After the war, Harley Earl, the legendary chief designer at General Motors, was deeply impressed by the P-38's distinctive twin-boom configuration and sleek modern lines. Earl had been involved in wartime consulting for the military and had studied aircraft design extensively. In 1948, he incorporated tailfin designs directly inspired by the Lightning's vertical stabilizers into Cadillac models, beginning with the 1948 Cadillac Series 62. Those modest fins would grow increasingly dramatic throughout the 1950s, launching a styling trend that would define American automobiles for nearly 2 decades. By the late 1950s, Cadillac fins soared nearly 3 feet high, a direct descendant of the Lightning's distinctive profile. The fork-tailed devil's influence extended from the skies of war to the highways of peacetime America, visible in every tail fin that cruised down Route 66. For the mechanics who maintain these complex aircraft, the Lightning presented unique challenges and advantages. The twin-engine configuration meant twice as many engines to service, but it also meant easier access. Cowlings could be opened from ground level, without ladders or scaffolding. The concentrated nose armament meant guns could be serviced and harmonized more easily than wing-mounted weapons. But the turbochargers, mounted in the tail booms and connected to the engines through complex ducting, were a constant source of problems. One crew chief recalled spending an entire night replacing a turbocharger in freezing rain at an English airbase, working by flashlight because any more illumination would violate blackout procedures. Another remembered the relief when a pilot brought back a Lightning on one engine with the other shot to pieces. At least they only had to replace one power plant instead of scrapping an entire aircraft. The Lightning's nose art became legendary because the central nacelle provided a large flat canvas directly in the pilot's line of sight. Nose art on P-38's was often more elaborate and visible than on other fighters. Scrap Iron the Fourth, Porky the Second, Marge. Each Lightning carried its pilot's personality into combat. One of the most famous was Pudgy, the series of aircraft flown by Robin Olds. The name and accompanying artwork transferred from aircraft to aircraft as Olds moved through different machines. These weren't just decorations, they were psychological armor, a way for young men facing death to assert their humanity and individuality against the industrial scale of modern warfare. German pilots, viewing captured or crashed lightnings, were often struck by this individualization. The Luftwaffe had largely abandoned personal markings by 1943, focusing on standardization and efficiency. The Americans, it seemed, could afford personality. One of the least known but most crucial roles the Lightning played was in reconnaissance. The F-5 variant, stripped of armament and equipped with cameras, was faster than the fighter version and could operate at even higher altitudes. These unarmed Lightnings photographed every major target in occupied Europe. Before D-Day, F-5 Lightnings mapped the entire Normandy coastline, flying repeated missions to track German defensive preparations. The intelligence gathered by these aircraft was absolutely critical to Allied planning. German pilots hated reconnaissance Lightnings even more than they hated armed ones. They were faster, higher, and almost impossible to catch. Luftwaffe ace Heinz Knoke described the frustration of attempting to intercept an F-5 Lightning that simply outclimbed his Bf-109, maintaining a speed advantage while calmly photographing German positions. He fired from extreme range in desperation, knowing his chances of hitting were minimal. The Lightning disappeared into the clouds, its mission complete. This happened repeatedly throughout 1943 and 1944. The fork-tailed devil, even without weapons, remained untouchable. The sound of the P-38 was as distinctive as its appearance. The two Allison engines, running counter-rotating propellers, created a unique audible signature. They were never perfectly synchronized, creating a rhythmic beating sound that veterans could identify instantly, even decades after the war. Allied troops on the ground learned to recognize that sound as friendly air cover. German troops learned to recognize it as a prelude to disaster. One Wehrmacht veteran recalled hearing that distinctive beat echoing across a French valley in the summer of 1944, and knowing with absolute certainty that American fighters were about to strafe his convoy. He survived by diving into a ditch seconds before the Lightning's concentrated firepower tore through the trucks. To this day, when restored P-38's fly at air shows, that sound transports elderly veterans back across the decades. Some smile, remembering when that sound meant safety. Others pause, remembering when it meant terror. The last P-38 combat mission in Europe was flown in May 1945. The fork-tailed Devil's War was over, but its legend was just beginning. Today, a handful of restored P-38s still fly at air shows, their twin engines and distinctive silhouettes still turning heads more than 80 years after Kelly Johnson first sketched the design. When they pass overhead, that unique sound, two Allison V1710 engines slightly out of sync, evokes an era when the outcome of civilization itself hung in the balance. The German pilots, who called it the fork-tailed devil, are nearly all gone now. The American pilots, who flew it into combat, are following them. But the aircraft remains, preserved in museums and kept alive by dedicated restorers, a testament to what American engineering and the courage of young pilots accomplished in humanity's darkest hour. The P-38 Lightning was unconventional, controversial, and ultimately victorious. It was a devil to its enemies and a guardian angel to those it protected. And in the skies over Europe, it helped write the final chapter of the Third Reich's aerial warfare. This was the fork-tailed devil. This was the lightning. This was how America fought and won the war in the air.